They told me the light of Terra would never die, that as long as the Emperor endured upon his golden throne, the Astronomicon would burn bright across the stars, guiding the faithful through the endless dark. I believed them. Every word, every sermon whispered beneath cathedral vaults heavy with incense and lies. But I have seen the truth, or something close enough to damn my soul. The light does not burn. It flickers, it screams, it bleeds across realities unseen by mortal eyes. I was once a chronicler of the Adeptus Administratum, trusted with the sealed archives that record his perpetual torment. But what I found beneath the sanctum vaults was not divinity. It was a machinery of despair so vast, so alive, that it could not have been built by human hands alone. I am not certain what I saw, only that it sees me still. If you have the courage to follow, to listen before the Inquisition finds these words and burns them from existence, then stay with me. Listen, share this tale with those who still dare to dream of salvation, for only in knowledge lies a faint shadow of deliverance. Perhaps even like, subscribe, and preserve this record before it is lost to the void. What you are about to hear is forbidden. What you are about to learn may unmake the faith you hold dear. I remember the smell before I remember the fear. A sharp tang of ozone, parchment dust, and the metallic sweetness of blood long dried into the stones. In the lower archives beneath the Administratum towers, the air never moves. It lies heavy and stale, pressed into the lungs until every breath feels like confession. I had spent years among these corridors, transcribing decrees, cataloguing Imperial edicts, and watching quills grind away men's lives one form at a time. We thought ourselves faithful scribes, servants of order and record. But now I see that we were merely the silent custodians of decay, our ink the lifeblood of a rotting empire that refused to admit its own death. The descent began with a sanction order, stamped, sealed, and delivered in the crimson wax of the Inquisition. It bore my name, my file designation, and the sigil of Terra itself. The command was brief. Retrieve archival fragment 775M from Vault Sigma Primus beneath the palace substrata. Authorization, magenta level clearance. No one I knew possessed magenta clearance. No one in my division even spoke of it. The others watched in silence as I prepared to go, their faces pale and eyes averted. One of them, an old friend named Carmentus, pressed a small votive into my palm before I left, a crude wooden aquila carved by his trembling hands. "For light," he said, "if the Emperor wills it." The elevator was ancient, a cage of brass and steel humming with forgotten hymns. As I descended, the walls trembled with the weight of the world above. The deeper I went, the fainter the light became, replaced by a dull amber glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. Servitors lined the tunnels, embedded into alcoves like grotesque icons, their eyes blind, their mouths muttering liturgies older than the Imperium itself. Some wept oil, others stared with frozen serenity as I passed, their augmetic fingers twitching in the air as if tracing unseen scripture. The first seal broke under the weight of my authorization sigil, and the gate shuddered open with the sigh of a dying god. Beyond it lay corridors unmarked on any map, walls carved with reliefs depicting saints in agony, martyrs nailed to data slates, angels whose wings were fused to cables and conduit. I walked alone for hours, guided by the faint hum that vibrated through the floor beneath my boots. It was rhythmic, mechanical, but almost alive. I could feel it in my chest, matching the pace of my own pulse. There were doors I dared not open, some sealed with the sigil of the Adeptus Mechanicus, others bearing the black wax of excommunicate decree. In one passage, I found a pile of discarded quills and a skull still clutching a stylus between its teeth, as though the poor wretch had died mid-sentence. Every step forward was a sin against ignorance, and I felt the Emperor's gaze, or something else's, heavy upon my back. At length, I came to a chamber that did not belong to any architecture of man. The stones curved in ways my eyes refused to follow, and the air shimmered as if heat rose from invisible fire. In the center stood a single dais, upon which rested a small data slate half buried in dust. Its screen still flickered weakly, lines of Gothic text scrolling without order or end. I brushed away the debris and saw the heading. Segmentum Report. Astronomicon Power Differential. 000.M32. It was impossible. No device from that era should still function, yet the light persisted. I read and my blood turned cold. The report spoke of power fluctuations in the Astronomican's psychic beacon, brief interruptions measured not in seconds but in heartbeats. The Emperor's light falters, it said. Energy readings suggest degradation of core biothermic matrix. Biothermic. Flesh and soul intertwined. It was the language of the Mechanicus, but even they would not dare commit such blasphemy to record. My vox bead crackled faintly in my ear, though I had not activated it. A voice whispered through the static. Not machine, not human. It said my name, just that, once softly. And then silence. I dropped the slate. For the first time in my service, I forgot to pray. The corridors grew narrower as I pressed on. The air so dense it felt as though I were breathing through cloth soaked in rust. The walls here were no longer simple stone or steel. They were veins. Bundles of copper and fiber optic nerve pulsed faintly beneath the surface, leaking motes of pale light like the glow of dying embers. My footsteps echoed too loudly, so I tried to soften them, but even the smallest movement drew responses from the dark. I could hear faint shifts in the metal, the groaning of the vaults themselves, the hiss of vents that seemed to exhale when I passed. It was as though the place recognized me, or mistook me for something it had been waiting for. After what might have been an hour, or a day, time loses meaning beneath Terra. I came to a gallery flanked by colossal statues of custodians. They were carved not in marble but in gold-veined ceramite, their halberds raised in eternal vigilance. For a moment I thought them mere ornamentation, until one's helm turned almost imperceptibly, tracking my movement. I froze. The air shimmered with faint heat. When I blinked, they were motionless again. I told myself I had imagined it, that the weight of heretical fear was making phantoms of holy things. Yet I could not shake the sense that the Emperor's guardians did not sleep. They waited, patient and absolute. The floor sloped downward into what the schematics had named Transit Axis Sigma. In truth, it was no corridor but a cathedral turned inside out. Pillars of adamantine spiraled with veins of luminous script, and above me stretched a ceiling of glassy black that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. There was a sound beneath the silence, a faint murmuring, thousands of voices whispering in unison. At first I thought it some psychic residue, but as I approached, I realized it came from within the walls themselves. The conduits hummed with language, not machine code, prayers. Recorded and replayed endlessly, their rhythms synchronized to the pulse of the world. Ave Imperator, Ave Deus in Machina. Have Eternum Rex. A faint warmth spread across my chest. The votive aquila my friend had given me was glowing, its edges curling with heat. I held it up and saw that the light it cast revealed shapes moving behind the conduits. Silhouettes of people, or what once were people, fused into the infrastructure. Their mouths were open, their faces serene, their eyes hollow. They breathed in unison with the pulse. I staggered back, clutching my rebreather. The realization struck like a hammer blow. These were not statues nor servitors. They were offerings. The vault was built not around the Emperor's machinery, but of it. The very foundations of Terra were bound by sacrifice. I turned to flee, but the corridor behind me had changed. The archway I'd passed through was gone, replaced by a wall of smooth metal inscribed with a new seal, one that shimmered faintly, forming my own name in High Gothic. The vault had closed itself, rewriting its structure to keep me moving forward. My knees weakened under the weight of it. By his grace, I whispered, though my voice sounded hollow and false. Guide me, my Emperor. The murmuring rose to a chant, thousands of overlapping voices forming a single wordless note that vibrated through my bones. My auspex began to flicker with psychic interference, readings climbing far beyond any human threshold. I felt heat behind my eyes, a pressure like someone pushing from inside my skull. Shadows rippled along the walls, and for the first time I felt a presence. It was not hostile. It was not benevolent. It was aware. I stumbled onward, clutching the aquila to my chest, half praying, half pleading. The path curved downward into a chamber of total silence. No hum, no chant, no pulse. Only a faint golden light seeping through a narrow doorway ahead. I realized then that this was no longer a descent into the earth. It was a descent into the Emperor himself, into the living corpse that was Terra's heart. My vox crackled again, that same faint whisper breaking through the static. Closer. And I obeyed. The narrow doorway led into a passage unlike anything I had seen above. The architecture shifted from Imperial severity to something older, stranger, a design that felt less constructed than grown. The walls were ribbed with blackened gold, wet to the touch, and humming faintly with an inner current that set the hair on my arms rising. I stepped inside, and the world behind me sealed with a soft metallic sigh. There would be no turning back. The corridor spiraled downward, illuminated by veins of faint blue light running through the metal like capillaries. I followed them, each step measured, each breath loud in the dead air. The hum became a resonance, a pulse that grew louder the deeper I went. And then I saw them, robed figures kneeling in a wide circular chamber below, dozens of them, their faces hidden by masks of beaten bronze, their spines fused with thick cables that disappeared into the floor. The air shimmered with heat and the bitter scent of burnt incense. They were chanting. Not the soft devotional murmurs of the ecclesiarchy, but a droning mechanical rhythm, each syllable delivered in perfect synchronization. Their movements were slow, ritualistic, their arms rising and falling in precise cadence. At the center of their circle lay an altar, fashioned from adamantine plates, upon which rested a writhing form, a man, or what had been a man, stripped of flesh in places where metal had begun to grow through his bones. Sparks leapt from the wounds as if the body itself were trying to reject the intrusion. One of the robed figures lifted his head and spoke in a voice like a broken vox. Biothermic transfer incomplete. Subject degradation at 72%. Proceeding with assimilation. He raised an instrument that looked like a cross between a scalpel and a communion rod and plunged it into the subject's chest. There was a scream, not human, not mortal, that echoed through my mind rather than my ears. The entire room trembled as the cables feeding into the floor pulsed with sudden light, flaring outward through the corridors. I realized then that the man on the altar was not dying. He was being added, absorbed into the greater system. I pressed myself against the wall, shaking. My every instinct screamed to run, but fascination rooted me to the spot. This was no secret ceremony. This was maintenance, a ritual necessary to keep the Emperor's machinery alive. The Mechanicus had always spoken of the Golden Throne as a relic of impossible design, a fusion of technology and divinity. But here in the bowels of Terra, it was revealed for what it truly was, a living engine that devoured life to sustain its own eternal hunger. A sudden mechanical chime rang through the chamber. The chant ceased. All heads turned toward the doorway, or toward me. For an instant no one moved. Then the figure nearest the altar lifted his hand, revealing a seal of the Inquisition burned into his palm. "Identify yourself," he said, his tone calm but heavy with command. My throat dried. I held up my authorization sigil, my voice trembling. Archivist Marius Cale, Administratum Lexicon Division. I was sent under magenta clearance. He cut me off with a single word. Impossible. The chant resumed, but this time it was not prayer. It was warning. The chamber's light began to dim, shadows lengthening across the walls. The air grew thick with static as the robed figures rose in unison, their cables snapping free from the floor like severed veins. I turned and ran, clutching the burning Aquila against my chest. The passage behind me pulsed with violent light, the hum rising into a roar that sounded almost like pursuit. The corridor twisted into a stairwell, then a bridge spanning a gulf so vast I could not see the bottom. Beneath it, machinery moved like the organs of a colossal body, pistons the size of cathedrals, gears grinding slowly against one another, all slick with oil that glowed faintly gold. The air was hot and damp, every breath tasting of ash and sanctified decay. I realized that I was inside the throne's foundation, walking through the arteries of the Emperor's tomb. At the far end of the bridge, I found a door inscribed with a sigil I had never seen before, not Imperial, not Mechanicus, but something older, geometric and elegant, like the script of a long-dead civilization. It pulsed gently as I approached, as though sensing my presence. For a moment I hesitated. Then the whisper came again, closer this time, curling through the vox like a breath against my ear. See. The door opened of its own accord, and a flood of golden light spilled out, warm and blinding. I stepped through, the light swallowed everything. It was not illumination as men understand it, but something thicker, almost liquid, that clung to my skin and burned behind my eyes. For a heartbeat, I thought I had gone blind, until the brilliance dimmed enough to reveal the chamber beyond. It was vast, immeasurable, shaped not by human hands but by the will of something far older. Golden pylons rose from the floor like the ribs of a celestial beast, each one threaded with streams of molten energy, coursing toward a central column of pure radiance. The sound was deafening, 1,000 mechanical hearts beating in unnatural harmony, each one echoing through the bones of the world. I took a step forward and immediately felt resistance, as if the air itself had weight. The pressure forced my knees to tremble. My vox emitted a burst of static that coalesced into fragments of whispers. Countless voices speaking as one, not in words, but in sensation. I felt their grief, their fear, their endless pleading for release. It was the psychic residue of those who had been sacrificed, the echo of 1 billion psychers whose souls had been bled into the throne. Before me, suspended in a cage of light and machinery, hung a figure, little more than a silhouette blurred by the brilliance. I knew instinctively that this was not the Emperor himself, but a projection, an echo of his will refracted through the web of the throne. The figure's outline wavered like heat distortion. My instincts screamed to kneel, to prostrate myself, to avert my gaze. But curiosity, that most dangerous of heresies, anchored me in place. A pulse rippled through the chamber, and the air vibrated with a single resonant tone. My every nerve burned as if electrified. Then, within the light, movement, tendrils of gold arcing outward like the arms of a star. They did not touch me, but I felt them brush against my mind, a caress of unbearable intensity. Images burst behind my eyes, visions of ancient Terra before the age of strife, armies marching beneath the double-headed eagle, and then ruin. Endless ruin. I saw the siege, the shattered walls of the Imperial palace, and the Emperor upon his throne, burning with power beyond mortal comprehension. When the vision faded, I was on my knees. My nose was bleeding and my fingertips trembled. The air had grown colder, the light dimmer. The figure was gone, replaced by the faint afterimage of a skull crowned in fire. I heard a voice, more deep, mechanical, but burdened with grief so immense it felt like gravity. "I am bound." The words reverberated through the chamber, echoing in the metal around me. I could not tell if they came from the machine or from within my own skull. The light must not die. The price must be paid. My mouth opened to speak, but no sound emerged. I wanted to ask what the price truly was, if it was his choice or ours. But the thought itself seemed to offend the air. The pressure intensified until I felt my ribs creak. The golden pylons around the chamber flared, their glow surging into the central column. The sound that followed was like the wail of an entire species, millions of voices screaming in perfect unison, fading slowly into silence. When I could move again, I realized I was alone. The chamber was empty, save for the dull hum of the machinery and the faint smell of ozone and incense. My Aquila charm had melted into a misshapen lump of gold against my chest, its edges seared into my skin. I forced myself to stand. Somewhere above I could hear the distant march of custodian boots, slow, deliberate, searching. They knew I was here. I turned toward the exit, but the door through which I had entered was gone, replaced by a narrow stairway spiraling upward into darkness. I climbed, each step echoing with the faint heartbeat of the throne behind me. I could still hear the voice in my head, repeating its phrase again and again like a broken litany. I am bound. I am bound. I am bound. When at last I reached the top of the stair, I found myself standing in a maintenance conduit overlooking a sea of machinery, the underside of the throne itself. Massive pistons rose and fell in slow rhythm, each one connected by chains of psychic energy that shimmered like molten glass. I realized then that this was not a throne at all, but a prison, a cage of light and suffering, maintained by faith and fear in equal measure. The truth clawed at my mind, demanding to be spoken, but I dared not give it form. Words are dangerous things on Terra. They can condemn a man faster than any bullet. And yet, as I turned away, I felt the faintest tremor in the floor. Not the rhythm of the machinery, but something new. A heartbeat, slow and deliberate, echoing from somewhere deep within the vault. The Emperor still lived, but the question that now haunted me was how. Something had followed me out of the throne's chamber. something that had once been divine, and now was awake. When I awoke, the world was red. Crimson warning glyphs pulsed across the walls, and the sound of 1,000 machine voices filled the air, a low metallic chant of logic and devotion. The chamber I found myself in was vast, cavernous, and alive with machinery. Cables as thick as serpents slithered through the gloom, dripping oil that hissed like venom upon the floor. The scent of burnt incense mixed with ozone and rust, choking the air with a holy poison. I was lying on a slab of cold steel. My wrists were bound in magnetic manacles, my veins threaded with tubing that glowed faintly with pale light. The hum of the machines around me resonated with my heartbeat, syncing perfectly. Somewhere in that rhythm I realized, the light inside me, the one I had taken from the throne, was still there, still pulsing, still alive. Figures moved through the haze, robed, mechanical, and reverent. Their faces were a lattice of brass and augmetics, their eyes glowing with flickering cogitator light. Tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, their limbs replaced with precision instruments of worship and dissection. They spoke in bursts of binary, sharp and insectile, each phrase punctuated by static prayers. Subject 47B, detected anomaly, psychic interference exceeding baseline human thresholds. A voice deeper than the others silenced them. No, this is not interference. From the shadows emerged a Magos Dominus, his frame a towering mass of metal and sanctified flesh. His skull was half machine, half bone, his jaw clicking with servo whine as he spoke. In one hand he held a data slate, in the other, a mechadendrite tipped with a syringe filled with golden fluid. "This one carries the echo," he said, his tone reverent, almost fearful. "Do you not feel it, brothers?" The hum of the throne in his blood. The others fell silent. I could feel their eyes on me, or whatever senses they used to approximate eyes. Their mechanical limbs clicked and whirred as they drew closer. I struggled against my bonds, but the metal held fast. "What have you done to me?" I croaked, my voice raw. The Magos tilted his head. "You have been touched, mortal. You carry within you what no one has since the age of heresy, a fragment of the Emperor's psychic resonance. We have searched for it for millennia, and now by divine error it rests within you." He leaned closer, his lenses focusing with an audible click. "We will study it, understand it, perhaps harness it." My heart pounded. The light within me answered, flaring violently, sending a burning wave through my chest. The machines around us flickered. For a moment the entire sanctum dimmed, every lumen guttered, every servo twitched, as if reality itself hiccuped. The Magos froze. So did his attendants. What is this?" he demanded. "The signal, it's responding." I didn't know what I was doing. I only knew that the light within me was awake, frightened, angry, desperate to be free. I felt it pulse through my veins like fire, and suddenly the magnetic locks shattered. The steel slab split open as if cleaved by an invisible blade. The nearest tech priest screamed, a sound more mechanical than human, as arcs of golden lightning ripped through the air, frying cogitators and melting augmetic limbs. The light spread outward in waves, pure and merciless, burning through metal and bone alike. Magos raised his arms, chanting machine prayers to the Omnissiah, but even he faltered under the psychic storm. "Contain him," he roared. "Do not let the throne's will escape!" But it was too late. The machines began to sing, not in words but in resonance, 1,000 tones blending into one impossible harmony. It wasn't the hum of machinery anymore. It was the same song I had heard within the throne chamber, the hymn of the dying god. It poured through every wire, every conduit, every sacred circuit. The Mechanicus sanctum itself was awakening, the machine spirit infected by the divine pulse. I stumbled to my feet, light bleeding from my skin in fine threads. My vision blurred, and in every flash I saw fragments of the Emperor's dream. Battlefields burning, angels falling, a galaxy screaming for salvation. I felt their pain, their devotion, their endless fear, and I felt him, not as a presence above me, but within, watching, waiting. The Magos was still standing, his augmetic limbs melted and fused to the floor, his eyes now twin orbs of molten gold. You are the conduit," he rasped, "the bridge between the throne and the flesh. You are what the Mechanicum has sought since the birth of the Astronomicon." I backed away. "I'm no bridge," I said. "I'm just a man." He smiled, who was a horrible mechanical thing. Then may the Omnissiah have mercy on mankind. For now the machine has learned to dream. The floor split beneath him, and a column of light swallowed him whole. The chant of the machine spirits rose to a deafening crescendo, and I knew, if I stayed, I would be consumed too. I ran, through tunnels of metal and steam, past dying priests and burning circuits. The palace above trembled, as if sensing what had awoken below its roots. Every step I took echoed with the sound of distant machinery, vast, ancient, and alive. Something had changed within the Mechanicus, something irreversible. The throne's heartbeat was no longer confined to its chamber. It was spreading, and I was its carrier. I fled into the tunnels beneath the sanctum, deeper than any map of the palace dared to mark. The air was thick with metallic dust and incense, the scent of machine oil clinging to my skin like a second soul. Behind me echoed the mechanical wails of the tech priests, a chorus of metal and madness. Their voices carried through the ventilation shafts, distorted by vox screamers, binary prayers to the Omnissiah, fused with words no human tongue had spoken in millennia. The corridors twisted endlessly, lined with conduits pulsing with dim orange light. I could hear the hum of the throne even here, faint, distant, but undeniable. It followed me like a heartbeat beneath the stone, a rhythm that refused to fade. Every few steps the light inside me flared again, unbidden. When it did, the world shifted. Walls rippled like the surface of oil, and for an instant I could see through them, see the skeletal labyrinth of pipes and chambers stretching for kilometers, see machine spirits crawling through the conduits like spectral insects of brass and fire. Each one turned its gaze upon me, recognizing something that should not exist. They whispered my name. Not the name I had been born with, the new one, the one I had heard in the throne's chamber, a word of power carved in divine geometry. I could not pronounce it, but I felt it vibrating in my bones. Every time they spoke it, the light in my chest burned brighter. "Stop him!" a distorted voice cried from behind, its mechanical timbre echoing through the steel halls. I ran faster. I passed through maintenance corridors, collapsed shrines, and rooms filled with statues of the Emperor rendered in 1,000 contradictory forms, as a man, as a machine, as a flame devouring the stars. In some, his eyes were hollow sockets filled with circuitry. In others, they were mirrors that reflected not my face, but the blazing sun of the Astronomicon itself. Each statue seemed to watch me as I passed, their stone lips whispering faint prayers that I could no longer tell were real or imagined. The deeper I went, the louder the whispers grew. The light in my veins pulsed in answer, and then the voice returned, the same one that had spoken to me through the helmet. "You cannot run from what you carry." I stumbled to a halt. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating in the air, in the walls, in the marrow of my being. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing down the tunnel. "What have you done to me?" "You took what was not yours. You reached for the fire that burns worlds. Now you are its vessel." I pressed my back to the cold steel wall, panting. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this." Neither did he. The words froze my blood. Before I could respond, the corridor ahead burst open in a shower of sparks. 3 Skitarii emerged, their augmetics gleaming, their red optics fixed on me. Their weapons hummed with static energy. Arc rifles set to kill. "By order of the Fabricator General," one droned, "the anomaly is to be contained. The throne's signal must not propagate." I raised my hands, but the light betrayed me. It spilled from my palms in thin golden streams, curling through the air like living fire. The Skitarii faltered, hesitated, just long enough for me to see the fear beneath their programming. Then they opened fire. Bolts of energy screamed through the air. One grazed my shoulder, searing flesh and fabric. Another struck the wall beside me, blasting molten shards of steel into my face. I fell to my knees, clutching my wound. The light in my chest surged again, not in pain but in rage. It answered their attack. Without thinking, I released it. The air bent, folded inward, and a wave of golden force exploded outward from my body. The blast sent the Skitarii flying. 2 of them slammed into the ceiling, crushed like insects. The third dissolved into motes of ash before he could even scream. Silence followed. The tunnel lights flickered. And for a heartbeat, I thought I saw shapes moving within the glow. Human outlines, faces, soldiers in antique armor. I recognized them from the histories, warriors of the Great Crusade long dead. Their spirits trapped within the throne's psychic field. They were watching me. One of them, a figure in ancient Mark III plate. His armor cracked and pitted, stepped forward. His eyes were hollow, yet they burned with golden fire. "He remembers us," the warrior said, his voice a deep echo. "Through you he remembers." I reached out, trembling. "The Emperor?" I reached out, trembling. "The Emperor?" "No," the ghost replied. "The man he was before the throne, the one who still dreams of the stars." And then they were gone, swallowed back into the light. The corridor fell silent again, save for the soft hum of power conduits. I slumped against the wall, shaking. The pain in my shoulder was fading, or rather healing. I looked down to see the wound closing on its own, sealed by faint gold threads of energy. The sight terrified me more than the wound itself. Something inside me was changing. Not just the light. Me. I could feel my thoughts growing heavier, layered with echoes that were not mine. Memories of wars I had never fought. Voices reciting litanies I had never learned. For a brief, terrible moment, I knew what it was like to see through his eyes and the Emperor's eyes. And in that vision, I saw the galaxy not as stars and empires, but as a decaying organism rotting from the inside out. I screamed, and somewhere, deep within the palace, I felt something answer. The throne pulsed once, a deep, thunderous heartbeat that shook the earth itself. I didn't need to be told what it meant. The light was no longer content to rest inside me. It was calling home. They said the throne was eternal, that it burned brighter than any sun, fed by 1,000,000 souls whose deaths were sanctified in silence. But I have seen that light dim. I have stood close enough to hear the throne breathe, yes, breathe, through the conduits that run beneath the basalt floor, exhaling the stench of rot and ozone. Each sigh feels like the last breath of a dying god, stretched across millennia. For most of my service, I believed the Emperor slept within that machine. His will diffused through its circuits like incense through a cathedral. I prayed to the radiant corpse and whispered my doubts into the grating. But lately, I have begun to wonder if the light we worship is not his, but the echo of something else, something vast and hollow that learned to wear his shape. When I was assigned to the lower sanctums, I thought I had seen the worst of it. The psychically drained, the servitors fused into walls, the drones that moved with clockwork grace through the dead. But what awaited me beneath the surface was different. There were no hymns here, no incense, no sound save for the slow rhythm of the throne's pulse. The air was thick, humming with static, and I could taste iron in every breath. We were tasked to calibrate the soul extraction manifolds, a duty that no sane man covets. They say each manifold drinks from 1,000 psychers a day. Their bodies are discarded, their minds sifted and pressed into psychic fuel. The priests say it is mercy. I have watched their faces when the feeding begins. Mercy is not the word I would use. Once I found an old data slate wedged behind a console. Its runes were faint, flickering with residual charge. It contained fragments of an old liturgical manual, one predating the heresy. The words were colder, cleaner. There was no divinity in them, no promise of salvation. It spoke of the stabilization core of the Astronomicon interface, not the divine beacon of his radiance. It made me realize that somewhere along the centuries, we replaced truth with worship, circuitry with faith, and yet the faith feels real. I have felt it surge through me when the throne hums in the dark. Sometimes it feels as if the machine itself is aware of us, not in mercy but in hunger. Like a god that feeds on belief and burns it, to keep the Imperium alive. There are moments during the cycle of the psychic feed when everything stops. The noise, the vibration, even the air itself pauses. In those instants I feel something staring back. Not a presence, but a vacancy so immense it has weight. Once, during such a pause, I heard a voice inside my skull whisper a word I cannot forget. Remember, I do not know if it was his voice or my own mind, fracturing under the strain. But I remember. Emperor, forgive me, I remember everything. The priests tell us that those who hear the throne speak are chosen, that we should record our visions for the Ordos. But the Ordos do not come. They do not listen. We send our confessions into vox lines that hum with static, and in return we receive silence. Silence and the steady pulse of a god machine that may no longer remember what it means to be divine. Last rotation, a tech adept named Carson tried to leave. He said he could no longer serve something that devoured more than it gave. They found him at the transit lift, his eyes burned out from within, his body rigid like carved stone. His lips were still moving, though no sound came. We sealed the lift after that. No one speaks his name anymore. Sometimes I dream of Terra as it once was, oceans glinting like steel, skyships cutting through the dawn. I wake to find myself beneath kilometers of machinery, in a world where the only light is the throne's sickly glow. They say the Emperor's gaze spans the stars. I wonder if he still sees Terra at all, or if his eyes are locked inward, staring into the endless dark between heartbeats. The ecclesiarch once visited. Surrounded by his gilded retinue, he looked upon the machinery with awe, not fear. He spoke to us of faith, of endurance, of divine purpose. Yet his words faltered when the machine shuddered beneath his feet. His robe smelled of incense, not oil. His hands trembled as he made the sign of the Aquila. So I saw it then, the same dread that coils inside me. Even he, the voice of the faith, did not believe entirely. And still we serve. Because to stop is to die, and to question is to vanish. The throne consumes both the faithful and the faithless alike. We keep it alive because without it, the Imperium would fall into night. Because the Astronomicon must burn, even if the one who fuels it no longer does. There are whispers among the lower acolytes, stories traded in coded liturgies when the overseers are gone. They speak of a chamber beneath the throne, sealed since the heresy, a place where the Emperor's heartbeat once resonated through liquid gold and living metal. Some claim that if one listens closely enough, one can still hear that pulse, faint and slow, like a dying star's final flare. I have listened, and I have heard nothing. Yet sometimes I think I see movement beyond the veil of golden light, shapes that shift where no light should be, shadows that bend in impossible directions. Perhaps they are the ghosts of those fed to the machine, or perhaps they are what remains of him, fragments scattered and self-aware. Chained within the throne's own circuitry, I used to pray for deliverance. Now I pray for understanding. But even that feels like heresy here. The last time I spoke those words aloud, a servitor paused its labor and turned its head toward me, as if it understood. Its face was a ruin of flesh and metal, yet I swear it smiled. The throne never sleeps. Neither do we. The cycle continues. The feed, the hum, the dimming light that never goes out but never brightens either. It is like watching eternity corrode. The priests say we are blessed to witness it. I think we are simply trapped, witnesses to a God's unending death. If there is a soul left inside that throne, I do not know whether it still remembers us, or if it watches from a place beyond all light, waiting for the moment the machine fails and the last human voice goes silent. Perhaps that is the Emperor's mercy, not salvation but release. And yet even as I think this, the machine stirs again. The hum returns deep and resonant, filling the chamber like the breath of an ancient titan. I feel it vibrate through my bones, through the ground, through the very air that trembles in worship or fear. I whisper the litany of service under my breath. My voice is raw, trembling, but it feels right, the only anchor left in a world built upon decay. The Emperor protects, I say, but the words sound hollow now, and somewhere deep beneath the throne, something laughs. There comes a moment when the light no longer blinds you, when its brilliance ceases to feel divine, and instead burns like revelation. That is when I realize the truth. The Emperor does not watch us. He endures us. The throne's light was faltering again. The priest called it a fluctuation, a minor instability in the Astronomicon relay, but I knew better. The sound was changing, deeper, slower, as though the machine's heart struggled to remember its rhythm. I could feel it through the metal beneath my boots, pulsing like the heartbeat of something ancient and exhausted. The upper adepts sent orders down the vox lines. Increase the feed. Double the psychic intake. The vaults filled with the scent of burning mines. I saw them carried in by the hundreds, rows upon rows of pale, trembling psychers, whose eyes begged for a mercy that never came. They disappeared into the furnaces of gold. The throne drank deeply that day, and for a moment its light flared so bright it seared my sight. When the brilliance faded, the silence that followed was worse than any scream. In that silence I felt a presence, not vast and divine, but weary and human. It was as if a voice pressed itself against my thoughts, not speaking, not commanding, but remembering. I saw fragments, the thunder of war, a golden warrior standing defiant on a mountain of corpses, a father's final breath whispered into a broken age. Then the images crumbled, leaving only the faint echo of sorrow. I understood then. The Emperor was not gone. but neither was he alive. He was something in between, a consciousness stretched thin across eternity, bound to the machine that was meant to preserve him. His soul, fractured and diffused, scattered through the conduits like starlight through dust. The throne was not his tomb. It was his prison. No one would believe me, of course. Faith is the only currency left on Terra, and truth is heresy unless it flatters the lie. But I could not unsee it. Every prayer now feels like mockery. Every hymn, a reminder that we keep his body alive only to fuel our own illusion of purpose. I began to record what I'd seen, my thoughts, my doubts, my fears, into an encrypted slate. I hid it deep within the maintenance ducts, wrapped in oilcloth sealed with my own blood code. Perhaps one day someone will find it. Perhaps they'll call me mad. Perhaps they'll understand. Last cycle, the throne flickered again and something strange happened. The servitors froze mid-motion, their cogitators silent. The air vibrated with a low tone, almost melodic, and the light dimmed to a soft amber glow. In that dimness I saw him, not as the emperor of mankind, but as a man, still, silent, broken. His eyes were closed, yet I felt the weight of his gaze upon me. It wasn't wrath I felt, it was pity. A part of me wanted to fall to my knees, to beg forgiveness for ever doubting. Another part wanted to scream at him, to demand why he let us rot in his shadow for 10,000 years. But I did neither. I simply stood there, breathing the stale, electrified air, and whispered, "Do you still hear us?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was full and thick with meaning I couldn't comprehend. Then, slowly, the throne's hum returned. The servitors resumed their labor. The light grew brighter once more. But for the first time I wasn't sure if it was the Emperor's will that sustained it, or ours. Since then I've felt a strange calm. Not peace, and that word no longer belongs to this age, but understanding. We are not his children. We are his caretakers, tending the corpse of a god who once dreamed of mankind's ascension. We built an empire upon his still-beating heart, and we called it salvation. The light above me flickers again. Dust falls from the vaulted ceiling like ash. Somewhere deep below, another manifold screams to life. The cycle continues, and I remain at my post, faithful to the end, not because I believe, but because belief itself is all that's left. I think often of what happens when the light finally dies. Will the stars vanish? Will the warp devour the last of humanity's hope? Or will he, whatever he has become, finally awaken? Maybe the Imperium will end not with fire, but with a sigh, a single breath escaping from the golden throne as the last spark fades. Until then I will keep watch, for in the heart of this dying world, beneath the weight of a god's corpse, I have seen the truth. The Emperor does not protect. He endures, and so must we. Would you like me to write an epilogue, 300, 400 words, a haunting closing reflection or final Vox transmission to give the story a cinematic end card suitable for YouTube narration? You said yes, ChatGPT said excellent. Here is the epilogue, 400 words, crafted to feel like the quiet final transmission of a dying adept, poetic, mournful, and perfect for cinematic narration or a YouTube outro sequence fading into ambient music and silence. Epilogue, Vox Record, final transmission, 400 words. This will be my last entry. The data slate's memory coils are almost full, and power in the vault has grown erratic. I can feel the floor trembling again, the endless rumble of machinery straining to keep the impossible alive. The golden throne no longer sounds like a machine. It breathes. Each pulse of light is slower now, deeper, like the chest of a dying giant struggling against the dark. I wonder if the Adeptus Custodes above can feel it too, or if they simply choose not to. Perhaps faith requires blindness. I am not blind anymore. The light has burned the truth into me. It is not glory that sustains this Imperium. It is inertia, the weight of a billion worlds refusing to stop moving, because to stop would mean acknowledging the corpse they revolve around. The Emperor was our beginning, but he has become our anchor, holding us in place while the stars move on. Sometimes when the conduits hum low enough, I swear I can hear whispers bleeding through the static, not voices of the warp, but echoes of his mind. They sound almost human. A sigh, a wordless regret. Once I thought I heard him say my name, though I no longer remember if that name was ever truly mine, or just a designation burned away long ago. If anyone finds this record, know this. I was faithful until the end. I did not abandon him. But faith is not the same as blindness. To see the truth and still remain is the only kind of devotion that means anything now. The throne groans again. The air fills with gold dust that glitters like dying stars. I can taste ozone and iron. The light flares one last time and I feel warmth on my face. Not divine, not holy. Just human. If he dreams, I hope his dream is merciful. If he wakes, I hope we are ready. For now I will lay down my tools. The light fades and the hum falters. The Astronomicon wanes across the void, and the Imperium drifts beneath the gaze of an eternal dawn. This is Adept Lex Mechanic Corin Vallis, Maintenance Cycle Terminus Designation 137. Vox record ends. Ave Imperator.